This is Angus King with Maine Veterans Voices Answering the Call, a part of the Oral History Project for Veterans, sponsored by the Library of Congress. And my guest today is Auta Main, who lives in Gardiner, Maine, who has a fascinating history in the United States Air Force and serving veterans after returning here to the state. So, Auta, welcome to our chat today. And start me out. Were you from a military family? How did you end up in the Air Force back in coming out of high school?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you. And thank you for having me today. I am not from a military family, although I did have three uncles that were in the military. Two were in the Navy, one in the Army, and one was a career a military person. So I learned a lot from them about their experiences and what they enjoyed, and that stayed with me. I grew up in Dresden, Maine, and in a very big family, seven siblings, and a working class family. My dad was a pipe fitter at BIW, and he then later worked for a union out of Boston. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. I was the second oldest of eight, and I had never given much thought to going into the military, to be honest. My dad tried to get in the military, but he had eczema, and he was disqualified. But when I was in
Now,
high school,
where did you go to high school? Where did people in Dresden go to high school in those days? Was it Lincoln Academy?
it was Wiscasset High School.
Okay, got it.
So yeah, so I went to Wiscasset High School, and I was a good student. So the expectation was that I was going to go to college, and I had applied to several colleges, and I did get accepted in some pretty good scholarships. But I had a sister that was older than me. She was already in college, and financially, I didn't get as much as I had hoped. But I was still probably going to go. But, the Air Force recruiter showed up at Wiscasset High School. There were 8 or 10 of us that said, let's go see what he has to say. It was really on a whim. And of course, at the time, they know what to say to appeal to 18-year-olds. And he talked about the travel opportunities. He talked about the GI Bill, which you would have when you got out, so you could get your degree. He talked about, meeting a diversity of people around the country and the world. And especially, he talked about occupations and the training, the great training that the military has. So I have to say, I was sold. I was sold by the time he was finished. And I came home and, of course, mentioned it to my mom and dad. They were not at all pleased. They wanted me to go, right to college. Um, but anyway, after some thought and conversations, I did decide to go in, and I went down and signed up for the military.
Well, let me stop you right there. I'm often struck by the role that chance plays in our lives. And I was struck by you saying I went to the meeting with the recruiter on a whim. I mean, you have to wonder where you'd be today if you had not had that whim, or if you had been sick that day, or gone to some other meeting at Wiscasset High School. It's pretty amazing when you look back over your life. All of us have these cases where something happened and it changes your whole life, but you certainly don't know it at the time.
That is so true. And you think angel messages, or what was it? I don't know. But it changed my life, and it changed my life in a significant way. So, and all for the positive. So
So you enlisted in the Air Force. You went to basic. Walk me through the process.
yeah, so I enlisted, and I did delayed enlistment, so I started 6 months later. And I flew from, Portland to Boston to San Antonio. Like many people from Maine or from around the country, it was my first flight. It was only my second time out of the state of Maine. With my family, we had gone to New Hampshire once. So I was so unexposed to the world, and everything was exciting. I remember being on the plane and just looking out at the world because it was a clear day, and I was so excited to go to basic training. And so we got to San Antonio, and of course, right away, we're shuffled over to basic in Lackland Air Force Base.
Now, how
And
many how many women in the group?
There were 50 of us.
out
So it
of,
was, well, I'm not sure what you're at.
well, how
Oh,
many women were there 50 women or?
oh, because I was in a section that was all women and
I
the
see.
drill
Okay.
sergeant was, it was just for women. Yeah. Although the drill sergeants that I had happened to all be men, which at the time would have made sense.
So started with basic training at the Air Force Base outside of San Antonio, and how did that go? I mean, what an experience for a young woman from Dresden, Maine, and Wiscasset High School. I mean, what were your
Yeah.
reactions and
Yeah,
thoughts?
I
And
think, just first of all, meeting the diversity of women, ethnic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, that was interesting. But I was 18. I was in pretty good shape because I was young and I had been athletic. So I was kind of looking forward to the exercises, both physical and mental endurance kind of exercises. And I had also just been studying. So, because I just graduated from high school. So I think it maybe was harder for people that were 24 or 25, but for an 18-year-old, it wasn't terribly difficult. But yeah, there were days when we just marched and marched, and we started with a backpack that had 5 or 6 pounds in it. But by the end of basic, we were carrying around 40 pounds.
wow,
So, we did a lot. We were exhausted. I remember saying this to Teague the other day that, we were asleep at 8 o'clock. We were asleep before we hit the pillow at night. We were so tired. And I may be one of few people ever, but I actually gained weight in basic training because I was so hungry by the time we got to the chow hall. Um,
so
but
basic training was just that. It was basic training. There was no specialization or knowing
no.
where you were going to end up at that point. Now, so what happens then? How do you make the transition to some kind of specialization?
Yeah, so in basic training, they did a lot of aptitude testing. And they had told me, they had mentioned to me before I went in that there were opportunities for languages, linguists. There were opportunities for people in personnel. They'd given me a list of, administrative type jobs and I think dental hygienists. I mean, there were a lot of others, but they had a lot of openings in those areas. And I was interested in languages, and I had taken 4 years of French, but growing up in Dresden, you're right next to Richmond, which has a very big Russian community.
Yeah,
So,
people don't. A lot of people in Maine don't realize that Richmond does have a Russian community that goes back 100 years or more.
yeah, with a beautiful Russian Orthodox church. And
Right.
some of my classmates, when I went to Dresden Elementary, were Russian and spoke Russian at home. And so languages interested me. Again, not something I'd given a lot of thought to, but I took the aptitude test and I passed. And so they told me that I would be going to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California for 45 weeks, so almost
Wow.
a year. And then they told me the languages that were available. Russian was one, at the time, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese. This was 1976. And anyway, I said Russian was what my first choice, and they gave me Russian because they needed a lot of Russian linguists at the time during the Cold War.
Can you really learn a language as complicated as Russian in 45 weeks?
Well, a lot of it was learning the alphabet, and but the teachers were amazing. I mean, they were from Russia, and um, they were just so good. And we learned Russian for 6 hours a day for basically 45 weeks. And it
And was this
started
was
with
this writing and fluency in speaking, both?
it was really oral comprehension. So it was less speaking and more writing and listening.
Good.
And when you would listen, then, be writing down what you're hearing. So,
So what happened next? 45 weeks in Monterey, and then what?
well, and what happens, of course, at that point too, is you're really becoming close to a lot of the people that are in school with you, and you're all looking at, okay, where are we going to be stationed? So again, choices. There were several places for Russian linguists to go. I chose Germany, and again got that. I ended up in southern Bavaria, which is about where I was about an hour north of Munich.
It's a
And
beautiful,
I would,
beautiful country.
oh my God, it was so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was the task in southern Germany?
Well, well, first of all, I ended up living on the economy, quote unquote. I lived with a German family because there wasn't enough room in the barracks for everybody. So that was really nice to have that opportunity. But what we did is we all were bussed out to a place called Gablingen Kaserne, and that is where we put on our headsets and we listened, in my case, listened to the Russians flying over, these were simulated missions, flying over Czechoslovakia and Poland. And we would listen for what they were saying, of course. And most of the time it was military language. You know, I'm flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet. The landing gear is extended. It was stuff that we anticipated. Sometimes when we were listening, we'd hear something unusual. And when we did, we would run out back, get the dictionary, and transcribe real quick to make sure it wasn't something of importance. And it usually wasn't, you know, it was just they were gabbing or Russian cuss words or, um, so in the time that I was in from 78 to 80, we didn't copy anything that was of vital importance. I believe the Cuban Missile Crisis was copied by Russian linguists. And so there have been times in our country when obviously we have, but that's pretty much what we did.
And did they know that you were listening? Did they know that they were being monitored?
Yeah, so that really, you know, floored all of us when we got there. We hadn't been there very long, and you know, just on our headsets, we actually heard our name, you know, our
Oh, you're
names.
kidding. You
No,
mean they
so
said, "Are you listening, Auta?" We're, you know.
yeah, so they, you know, we talk about, I don't know, everybody doing a little bit of spying here and there, but I think yes, somehow they'd gotten a list of who graduated from where and went where. Um, so yeah, I
Now,
think they knew.
while you were in the Air Force, you discovered something about yourself that I hope and believe you're comfortable in talking about your
Yes.
sexual orientation. Tell me about how that came about.
Yeah. Um, well, you know, it's interesting because again, I didn't know, as you said, I discovered this about myself. I didn't know that I had any leanings or, you know, I didn't know that I was gay. But while I was in the Air Force, I fell in love with a woman and it totally took me by surprise. And it's one of those times in your life where you're excited, you know, you want to shout it from the rooftops. But here I am in the military where they're basically telling me if we find out anybody here is actively in being gay, then there's a likelihood that you will be expelled or, you know, kicked out of the military, basically
So
separated.
that was even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, that was if we find out, you're out. So you had to really hide that relationship.
Yeah, we really had to hide it. And there was a pretty fierce investigations going on at the time in the 70s. And investigators would follow you on the weekends. They would follow you home. They were trying to find proof. My commander called me in one day and said, you know, Otto, we're hearing rumors that you might be gay. And that and I just want to remind you that you could be kicked out of the military for any gay behavior. And he said, I know the rumors aren't true. That's what he said. And he sort of just gave me that quick warning, and that was that. And I didn't, as far as I know, I wasn't investigated further, but I had friends that were really investigated to the point that they just got out. It was too hard for them to stay in.
And these were people that could have and were useful and important members of the Air Force.
Yeah, these were people with amazing talents. And, you know, as I think was Matlovich was famous for saying the military gave me a medal for killing two men and they they discharged me from the military for loving one. And he had been in, he had a career. He'd been in for 16 or 17 years. So there were a lot of stories at that time.
Now, did you leave the Air Force after this assignment in Germany, or were you deployed somewhere else?
Yeah, I left. It was I did a 4-year tour and I was done when I was in Germany.
And but after that 4-year tour, you had the GI Bill, right?
I did.
And
And
so you ended up where you started of thinking about college, except you had it paid for.
I did have it paid for my college, and it paid for part of my housing. And I also got 18 credits for my Russian language training.
I've
So I
often
had a little head
I've
start.
often said that the two most important economic development projects of the mid 20th century were the interstate highway system and the GI Bill.
Yeah,
Because the interstate highway system tied our states together, and the GI Bill gave people like yourself a shot at college that you probably wouldn't have otherwise had.
absolutely. No, it's huge. I mean, and today the GI Bill is even more generous. It's really wonderful.
Now, did you come back to Maine after leaving the Air Force?
I did. I came back to Maine and I ended up going to the University of Southern Maine to get my degree, and ended up getting a degree in business. It
And
was
you did business for a while, but then you ended up helping veterans, right?
That's right. So I ended up for 10 years, I was in the business community. I worked in insurance and I worked in retail management. And honestly, by the time 10 years was over, I just said, I need something that fills my soul more. I needed something that felt like it had mission, purpose, something meaningful, which I hear from a lot of veterans that I've worked with over the years. And that's how I felt. And so I ended up working in the nonprofit community for 10 years. I worked at New Ventures, Maine, which was at the time called Displaced Homemakers. I'm
Oh,
sure
my
you
wife
know
Mary
Jilda.
was, yeah, Mary was involved with that with Gilda back when it was first created.
Yes. And that
Oh,
was wonderful work. And that was working with women and refugees in transition. And we did some entrepreneurship training. And then I worked in the time banking movement, which was worldwide, but it was building community and neighborhoods by trading services with each other. And Richard Rockefeller was the founding president in Maine.
yeah.
And again, I really, really enjoyed both of those. And that was sort of my shift into work that felt more service oriented.
And then you ended up working with veterans at the Maine Department of Labor, right?
Yes.
Tell
Yes.
me about
So,
that. Tell me what the job was like. What was it all about?
yeah. So, a friend of mine had gotten appointed to a position at Labor and asked me to come. And I did. And I was doing program management, several different positions at the time. And the guy that was leading the Veterans Employment Program decided to give his notice. He was younger than I was, so I never anticipated that job coming open. But it did. He found another job. And the leadership at the Bureau of Employment Services came to me and asked me if I wanted the job because I was the only veteran at the Bureau of Employment Services. So I was eligible for the job. So I said, yes, please. And it turned out to be just under 10 years of service doing veterans employment. We had 15 vet reps around the state that worked at career centers, and our primary focus was to help veterans find jobs. And we worked closely, of course, with the entire veteran community and wraparound services.
So when was this? What years were you with the Department of Labor?
I was with the Department of Labor from 2003 to 2020.
Okay. You just recently retired
I
from
just
that job.
retired, yes,
Well, now let me go back to the time you left the Air Force. In
yes.
these interviews that I've been talking to people, one of the things that keeps coming up is the inadequacy of the transition process for people leaving active duty and going into being to being veterans. Did you find that to be the case? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know we have the TAP classes, there are several issues. One, when veterans get out, they're just so hungry to find work, and they often take jobs that are, we call them survival jobs, but they often take jobs that really where they're underemployed. And when that happens, of course, they leave those jobs. One of the big issues is that over the years, we've been trying to get the Department of Defense to give us the contact names of veterans that will be separating in the next 6 months,
Couldn't agree
to give them
more.
to Department of Labor. And because of, for confidential reasons, it's never really happened. In the TAP
Yeah, but it,
classes,
it, it seems to me, Auta, that one of the ways to solve that is to have the soon-to-be veteran sign a waiver that says, you can give my contact information to
yes,
a veteran service organization or
yes,
a nonprofit. I mean,
yeah.
uh, one of the people I was talking to about this very recently talked about the idea that I think is a great one of a kind of buddy system. You come out and you're assigned somebody in the community where you're going to be who's a veteran who will help sort of mentor you through this process. But we've got to overcome this uh, this awful non transition problem.
Yeah, I mean, there are other issues, but I think that's the biggest one because what happens is, we're sort of um, last minute, they're being told, hey, there are career centers around the country, and they give them the website, and we do get some referrals from that. But what they're not being helped far enough out, and then they get out of the military, and they think also veterans don't want to ask for help, so they say they can do it on their own, and they'll spend 8 or 9 months not really finding the right job. They finally find us, and we can really help them get focused on finding a job that is high wage, high demand, that suits their skills. The other, and I'm sure Senator King, you've heard all of this before. The other thing is the transferability of the skills that they learn. There are a few occupations in the military, while all the military training is fantastic, and it really is, um, in the medical arena, you've got the combat veteran that goes to school for months, and he gets out of the military after 5 or 10 years. He's been on in combat. He's done a lot of nursing type activities. He's even performed surgery on the field when it was necessary. He gets back to Maine or whatever state he separates in, and he's told that he can be a CNA, and that he still needs to pass the test. And I can attest to the fact that there were a lot of veterans that had medical experience that ended up going into another field in Maine because they weren't going to start as a
Yeah.
CNA.
Well, and we desperately need those
And we're
professionals.
so desperate for them. Yeah. So, and I don't know if you know Commissioner Ann Head at the Department
Oh,
of
sure.
Professional
I've known her for 30 years.
and she's unbelievable, and she's been so progressive. So we actually have made some strides in Maine, and in other states they've made some too. I mean, one was an electrician. If you'd been in the military as an electrician, you didn't have so many supervised hours by a licensed electrician. So it was causing a hiccup when they would apply, fill out the application. They were told, no, you got to have this. So Anne has been able to waive that and just get, a written note about what they did have. So, again, we're working on it, and I think with some success, but
I, I think, to me, it can be summed up by saying we should care more about skills than credentials.
yes. Oh, yep. I would
Well,
totally agree with that.
I'm working on it down here. I know Dennis McDonough, who's the new head of the VA, and I'm going to be talking to him about this because the tragic part of this transition issue is that it's the maximum danger time for suicide. The
Yes.
data is that, we all know there's a huge problem of veteran suicide, but the data tells us that the first year or two after separation from active duty is the time when a disproportionate number of tragic events happen. So I think
Yeah.
it's something we've just got to do better.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah.
Now, you're retired. you're retired from being retired, but now you're back. You're doing volunteer and community work. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm thrilled. I'm working at Cabin in the Woods for Volunteers of America, Northern New England, and I was involved in the earlier days when, if you remember, June Cagle was presenting the idea of doing Cabin in the Woods, and boy, to see that come to fruition, and now to be able to actually be working with the veterans that live there,
Now,
and
are these veterans that were formerly homeless? Who's qualified?
that's absolutely correct. So these are homeless veterans that have now moved into permanent housing. And there were 11 veterans that moved in August of 2018. And of those 11, 9 of those 11 are still there. And the 2 that don't still live there have since passed. But the 9 that are still there, for a couple of them, it's the longest they've ever lived anywhere, 4 years. So, but of course, we have 21 cabins and they're all full and they're always full. We have a wait list.
Or
But
the cabins are up on the grounds at Togus, aren't they? Or
they
right
are,
adjacent? Yeah.
yes, yes.
Well, let me conclude a minute and talk about veteran services and Togus. Uh, have you found the VA in Maine is responsive and helpful, and the medical services good? That I'm interested in the voice from the field.
I would say extremely so. And I think we might not have felt that way 10 years ago, but I think right now they're very responsive. And as you know, they're very progressive. I mean, the whole telemedicine, I think, field started with the military, and Maine has done a great job with that. But
Well,
the most of the veterans I talk to are very happy.
I visited the new Seabach down in Portland. If you're down that way, you ought to stop in. It's amazing. It's right down on the waterfront, a phenomenal facility that's very well designed and will be serving veterans in the southern Maine region for many years. So that's been encouraging. Well, we go back to the very beginning. Uh, Joining the Air Force, I heard you say, was the right thing, and it was important to you at the time. Oh, I wanted to ask one other thing. At the time you were in, there weren't that many women in the military. Was that hard? Did you experience any harassment or what we hear about today that's so unfortunate?
Yeah, I personally did not experience any of that. I really enjoyed working with men. I have a few brothers and I enjoyed it. However, I certainly knew people that did. And the other thing is that the leadership in the military is almost all men because 97% of the people in the military were men at the time. And so there were just sensitivities about women that they didn't think about. And a lot of the women, as you know, that experienced military sexual trauma, they were not believed. They were told, they weren't helped at the time. Now I
Yeah.
think we have really made up for that. And I did, if I can, I'd like to go back just to quickly to being gay in the military and saying when people got out of the military with a other than honorable discharge or a general discharge for being gay, it made it very hard to find employment. And, because of course, an employer will ask for your DD 214, they know to look for what your discharge type was. And until 1973, um, uh, being gay was considered a mental illness. So I know it makes me crazy to even think that it was during our lifetime, but
Maybe makes me crazy isn't exactly the phrase you want to use.
yeah, yeah, right.
That's
That's
amazing. That's amazing. And that's no longer the case. I mean,
that's right. It isn't. And I know Sarah and David at the Maine Bureau of Veteran Services have been so good. I mean, they're now upgrading anybody who got an other than honorable or general discharge for being gay. They're upgrading their DD 214s to say honorable. And there was a story of a woman in her 90s that finally got that upgrade and just sobbed and sobbed, because it was so meaningful to her.
well, it would be. Well, Auta, I just want to thank you for a life of service in all kinds of different dimensions, and it's fabulous to have an opportunity to talk to you and to share the experience. And I know it's going to be it's now part of the historical record. And thank you for continuing your service in the state of Maine. We're all the better for it. And again, thanks for taking the time with us today. And I look forward to meeting you in person along the way.
Yes, and thank you very much for the opportunity and for doing these videos. Very much appreciated.
Thanks. See you later.